What is up, guys? TopTierYugioh here, and today I've got a Runick White Forest deck profile for you guys. I never thought I'd be playing Runick Cards, but here we are. This deck did not get touched at all on the September ban list, and so it's in a very good position in this upcoming format because everything else got hit. And I was already performing really well with this deck, and so I have a lot of confidence with this moving forward. Let's go ahead and get into the list. We're going to talk about what I was playing and what's going to be changing moving forward with the new list and the new format. So let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, and so this is a White Forest deck more than anything. This is not Runick Stun or anything like that with White Forest cards. This is a White Forest deck, so we're going to start with the White Forest engine. And for that, we've got 3 copies of LZ, 3 copies of Runick, 3 copies of Sylvie, 1 Tails of the White Forest, and then finally 1 Woes of the White Forest. And so now you'll notice that we are not playing a Stellar, which was the main focus of the other White Forest deck that I profiled, but you don't really need it in the Runick build because what a Stellar and also LZ to an extent provide to the White Forest combos are level 2 non-tuners. However, in the Runick build, all of your Runick spell cards, however many you play, you're playing at least 15, 16, upwards of maybe like 20 in some builds, but all of those can special summon Hugin, which is also a level 2 non-tuner. And so you don't necessarily need to take the risk of using a Stellar to get there. So with a Stellar, it's going to cost you your normal summon, and then in order to get the other level 4 tuner on the board, you're going to have to use the effect to discard a spell or trap and special summon one from your deck, which is risky and vulnerable to cards like Veiler, Imperm, Ash, so many other forms of interaction. And so you don't necessarily need to take the risk in the Runick build because you already have access to with your Runick card, you already have access to level 2 non-tuners. And so instead, we're playing many more of the level 4 tuners. So again, in this build, we're playing 6 copies of the tuners, 3 non-tuners, and then all the Runick spells are non-tuners. Whereas in the other builds, you're playing like maximum copies of LZ and the Stellar, some more of the non-tuners, and you're using their effects to get to the tuners. And so things are a little bit flip-flopped in this build compared to like the toy build of White Forest or the Fiendsmith or Kashtira builds of White Forest. So it is a little bit different, but you still get there at the end of the day. You're still able to get to your White Forest synchros, you're still able to get to Diabel, your Woes, you're still able to resolve Silvera multiple times on your opponent's turn, which is just an incredible disruption in this format, especially against decks like Snake Eyes and Yubel, which can't really utilize face down monsters too well. And yes, Yubel confused with them, they're still not doing too much. But the other synergy that I like about White Forest Runick and the White Forest cards in particular is with Runick, because Runick really lets you cycle through your engine so much faster than you normally would. Like I found that like in other White Forest decks, I wasn't always using Runick's effect to draw, but in this build, I'm doing it basically whenever I can. And if you combine that with like Fountain, there are turns where you're going to be drawing like 7 to 8 cards. Like you might resolve Fountain for 3 twice, Runick once, Coral Dragon draw. Like you can draw so many cards in this deck, and Runick is a big part of that. And also, I still think that Tails is like the worst White Forest card by far, but we still have to play because there is a combo that I like with Sylvie that I'll show you guys a little bit later in the video. But I do think that Tails is a necessity in this version of the deck. But that's it for the White Forest engine. Let's move on to the Runick cards. Now, the last thing about a Stellar that I almost forgot to mention is that I have been testing a single copy of it in the main deck because even though it's not a card that you want to draw, it's still a card that's very good once you get it in rotation, and it's very easy to do so with Woes. But then once you get it in rotation, you get it in the graveyard, it's basically a free summon with the effects of cards like Runick and Arciella, and then even Hugin and Coral Dragon to a bit of a lesser extent. But once you get it in rotation, it's very free, it's an extra body, and it gives you more ways to really just structure your plays. And that's really valuable in a deck like this where you need that flexibility. But also in the mid to late game, I find it a lot easier to resolve that first effect because you've already whittled down your opponent's resources and defenses with your Runick cards and whatever your initial plays were. And so I do like having a Stellar at 1 in the main deck. I'm still sort of testing how many other White Forest cards I want to play. Do I still want to stick with 9? Do I maybe want to cut something else? Do I want to decrease the normal summons? Because if you draw a Stellar, even though you don't plan on drawing it, even though it's not good to draw it, if you do, it's still a normal summon. So you don't want to draw like a Stellar plus Sylvie, or even a Stellar plus LZ, because if you try to use both of their effects, it's going to require a lot of spell cards, which you don't really want to do. Like if you open up LZ plus a Stellar, you don't often have 2 spell or traps to use for both of their effects. So it's not really an ideal combination either. And so It's tricky, but I have been testing it. I'll let you guys know how that goes for sure. So we've got 2 copies of Fountain, 3 Tips, 3 Flashing Fires, 3 Destructions, 3 Freezing Curses, 2 Slumbers, and then 2 copies of Dispelling. Now, I think what I will change moving forward is I might switch one of the Dispellings into a Smiting Storm, like the hammer looking one. Because both this effect and the other one's effect don't really go off that much. You're not really trying to use them. They're just runic spells that, you know, are runic spells. They do something, but you just want different names in a lot of cases. So rather than playing 2 copies of this, I think I'd rather have 1 and 1 of, you know, the useless ones. But the other ones I think are necessary in their ratios. You could go up to a 3rd Slumber, but I didn't want to play an extra card in the deck, and again, I don't want too many copies of multiples of the ones that don't really do as much. And so Flashing Fire, Destruction, and Freezing Curses are all going to help you break boards. They're all going to be good defensive cards as well, but Slumber doesn't necessarily do that, and so I didn't find it necessary to play the 3rd copy. But if you did want to up the runic names, just because we only have, let's see, 3, 6, 9, 12, 16 usable runic cards, if you want to increase that to like 18 or 20, you would have to play more copies of Slumber for sure. But as constructed, I was pretty happy with this ratio. And I know some people will say that the number that I'm playing, the count, is a little bit too low, but I'm actually playing this deck blind going second. And so for a lot of decks, a lot of runic decks, they're playing 18 because like 18 and 20 because they're going first. They're only seeing 5 cards, but with this deck, I'm going second, I'm seeing 6, and so the percentages change a little bit, and so I'm definitely fine with 16. I just ran the numbers actually, and so just to compare, if you're playing a 40 card deck and you have 18 runic spells in a 5 card hand, your odds of drawing more than one of them, which I do think is like ideal, you want to draw like 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 runic cards, because it's going to allow you to resolve the most, it's going to give you the most value out of your Fountain, which you're hopefully going to be able to get to. And so again, if you have 18 runic spells in a 40 card deck going first 5 cards, your odds of seeing more than one, so setting the bar pretty low, is about 76%. However, if you were playing 16 runic spells and you're going second, and so you have 6 cards, your odds of seeing more than one is 78.7%. So again, because we're going second, you are going to be able to get away with playing less runic cards. And I also think that opens up a lot of deck space for non-engine, but also I think it gives you the most value out of your runic cards, because going first, none of them do anything outside of special summoning bodies, which is useful because that does let you combo with your White Forest cards, but going second, you're able to break your opponent's board. And I think that is a lot more useful, especially when you consider the inefficiencies of a lot of the decks of the current format, especially a deck like Snake Eyes, which even got hit and they're even less efficient now. Or there's so many decks can't deal with making their first board and then having that board broken and then being able to efficiently play. Whereas this deck, your White Forest engine and your Runic engines both are giving you constant value turn after turn after turn. You're banishing cards from your opponent's deck, which is making them even weaker over turns. And so it really allows you to effectively play the control. Whereas I think if you go first, so if we go into a little bit of theory here, if you think about the who's the beatdown theory, which I have a whole video on, I'll link it in the description or somewhere. But if you think about who's the beatdown, right? The beatdown deck being the player who is trying to end the game immediately. Then you have the control deck who is trying to extend the game. Inherently, because the runic spells will force you to skip your battle phase, if you were going first, you cannot play the beatdown very effectively. It just doesn't work because you don't have a battle phase to end the game for a couple of turns. But you can play the control, and going second gives you the highest ability to do that. And so if you force your opponent to go first, you're forcing them to be the beatdown, but they can't do it because they don't have a battle phase on turn 0. So you have to extend the game, but you're forcing them into an uncomfortable position, and you are more equipped to actually play that position. Whereas going first, it's not quite the case, and you have to rely on drawing a lot more non-engine to do so. So I do think that this deck is better suited for going second. And then with that, I am playing 3 copies of Molcharmi Perulia in the main deck. I think in order to break the modern boards, you do need to have more cards, and Molcharmi is one of the best ways to do that. I do think you have to sort of judge your opponents a bit as well, because you want your opponent to play into Molcharmi. You do not want them to like not pass. And so I think this deck really benefited in the previous format in that people thought you were playing Tempai, and if you were playing Tempai, they have to build a board, and then like they think they need to build a board in order to keep you from OTKing them. Whereas if they knew you were playing Runics, the downside is that they can just like past turn, and they know that you can't kill them because you're on Runicks. And even if you don't play Runick cards, if you just play White Forest cards, it's very difficult to just OTK in a clear board on turn 1. And so that is a downside of Mulch Army, but when it works, it's very, very good because you're going to be starting your turn with maybe 6 to 7 cards. Well, I mean, you'll always have 6, but sometimes 7 or even more. And again, having all of those extra Runick spells is going to help you immensely in terms of both breaking the board and just having extra cards to shuffle back into the, or not shuffle, but to put on the bottom of Fountain and then draw more of your board breakers. It also just directly gives you a higher chance of seeing your board breakers. And for those, I'm playing 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More, and then 3 copies of Evenly Matched. Evenly is insane, this format. Like, it is just so good. I think every time I resolve Evenly, the win rate on Evenly has to be ridiculous. Like, it has to be like 75% plus for sure. Because again, these decks right now just are not efficient enough to deal with getting most of their board resources banished face down. They just cannot deal with that. And so really I'm banking on seeing like any of these 9 cards in my opening hand. And while it may not seem like a lot, like 9 going second cards versus, you know, a standard Snake Eye or Yubel deck that might have 10 to 20 hand traps, like I'm not playing as many non-engine cards as them. If you combine it with the Runick cards, there are so many more going second cards. And so if you're playing against like a Desiree, you can go Battle Face, Destruction, hit the sequence, and then evenly match the whole board. If they don't have another spell trap negate, they're cooked. You can have Flashing Fire to negate like a, or not negate, but to destroy like a Caesar. I can't find the Freezing Curses, but you could use Freezing Curses to negate something. Like there's so many ways between Destruction, Flashing Fire, Freezing Curses, tip to search them, but you can easily break your opponent's board with them. And then when we get to the extract, you're going to see many other ways that I have of breaking opponent's boards. And then the final cards that I'm playing in the main deck are 3 copies of Skill Drain, There Can Be Only One, and then Rivalry of Warlords. Now, Skill Drain obviously got limited on the most recent ban list. This was a 43 card deck, and so now it is a 41 card deck. I did also decide to cut the Rivalry to get it down to 40. Now, cutting Rivalry because I felt that there were a lot of boards right now that are simply the same type. Like, Rivalry and There Can Be Only One in theory are cards, and Goes in Match too. They're cards that you could set into a board and then activate it, and if it resolves, your opponent's going to have to, like, it's a board wipe effectively. Like, they're going to have to get it down to 1 type or 1 attribute or only 1 monster, like depending on the floodgate that you have, but they do break down opposing boards. But with Rivalry, I felt that it really depended on the matchup more than like There Can Be Only One. So with Rivalry, it's like if you're playing against Yubel, they're all Fiend, so it does literally nothing. And especially with Yubel looking to be one of the strongest contenders of this upcoming format, I think Rivalry gets even weaker. And there are a lot of decks like that. A lot of decks in boards are just monotype. Or if they're not, maybe you're dealing with just 1 monster, but then everything that they have to like follow up with is still the same type. So I don't find it being as useful right now. But There Can Be Only One is great against those decks, which is why I will be keeping it in the main deck, with Skill Drain being the only 2 sort of floodgates and strictly only defensive cards in the deck. And I like it that way. I like having fewer strictly defensive cards because you want cards that serve multiple roles. And the Runick cards can be both defensive cards or breakers. That's what you want. You don't want just defensive cards like a bunch of floodgates. I don't think this deck performs as well like that. That's why Runick Stun is not as good as a White Forest Runick. They have too many cards that only do one thing, whereas we're able to play multiple roles. We're able to have a lot more versatility, and we can win games in a variety of ways, whether it be decking the opponent out, whether it be just outlasting them and being more efficient because you're breaking their board, they don't have much follow-up. Or sometimes you can go on the offensive and you might resolve a really good Silvera, flip a couple monsters face down, put a few synchros up, and just OTK with double piercing. So you have a couple different ways that you can win the game. And that's, I think, what makes this deck so much fun to play, but also so rewarding to play, because when you choose the right way to end the game and you make those correct decisions, it feels really good. But that's it for the main deck. With the 2 skill drains and the Rivalry dropped, it is a 40 card deck. Let's go ahead and go into the extra deck. So starting with the White Forest synchros, we have 1 copy of Arciella, 1 copy of Silvera, and then 1 copy of Diabel, Queen of the White Forest. This is pretty standard. You only need 1 copy of each because you can use your Rucia and your Sylvia effects to keep shuffling them, or not shuffling, but to keep putting them back in the extra deck. So you have infinite copies of all of them, so you only need 1. I will say that Arciella is a lot worse in this version of the deck than any of the other builds because you just simply don't have that many White Forest cards that you want to search. So I find myself not using the effect very much, because if, let's say, I start with normal summon Sylvie and Sylvie gets me to Tails or Woes, I don't necessarily need the other one to where I might, like, I'm not going to want to, like, send a Fountain or a Runick card to go search a Tails, you know? Like, it's just not going to happen. And so, or searching a second copy of Rucia maybe isn't going to be that good. Like, maybe it's solid on the follow-up, but you really don't need it because you can just summon it back from the graveyard anyways. So I really don't find myself using Arceella that much. But Silvera and Diabell definitely are really, really good. But that's it for the White Forest Synchros. For the other Synchros, we've got one copy of Chaos Angel, which is definitely the MVP of the non-White Forest Synchros, one copy of Coral Dragon, one Zapper Shrimp, and then one Chen Yang. So Chaos Angel is really good because it's great at breaking boards. Coral Dragon also can help you break boards, but also the draw comes up a lot as well. Zapper Shrimp and Chen Yang I actually don't make very often, and maybe I'm just playing the deck wrong, but hey, I'm winning a lot of games. I'm doing very, very well with this deck, but I have not been summoning Zapper Shrimp and Chen Yang that much. Chen Yang has come up a couple of times, and it's been very good each time, but I find that I'm very often only summoning one rank 10 per game. Like, I'm never going Chaos Angel and Chen Yang, and they're both going to clear a card from the field most likely. They're both very hard to deal with, but I find that Chaos Angel is a little bit harder for a lot of decks to deal with because it's impervious to activated monster effects. So your opponent's not going to be able to, like, SP Little Knight this or Flame Birch push back this, whereas they do have outs to Chen Yang. A lot of decks do have in-engine or easy to access within their extra deck outs to a Chen Yang. And so while it may be better from a defensive standpoint, like, you can have Chen Yang plus Runick spells, and the Runick spells can trigger the Chen Yang. Like, it's good, yes, but it's a lot easier to deal with. Whereas Chaos Angel on its own can sometimes just be like a win condition, especially if you can set it up with like a Slumber too sometimes. And so let's say you're playing against Tenpai and you have a Slumber, they have literally no way to out it if it's Light Dart. Like a Light Dart Chaos Angel and a Slumber, they would have to have multiple board wipes, which simply is not going to happen unless, hey, they got it, but it's very unlikely. But Chen Yang, not so much. The Zapper Shrimp also doesn't come up very much. I know you can summon it off of the Diabell, and then you can use that to clear a spell or trap, and then, yeah, it's a thing. You can do it, but I find that there are not a lot of matchups where I'm using Diabell to summon a Zapper Shrimp and then go into anything instead of just using Silvera to Book of Eclipse the whole board. Like, it's just generally so much of a better play. And I think the matchups where you would maybe value the Zapper Shrimp's ability to do that, to where, okay, yeah, you destroy a spell or trap, and then maybe you quick synchro into Chen Yang or Chaos Angel, which could banish a monster, a spell or trap, or like card. And same with the Chen Yang, like, sure, but the big difference is getting the spell or trap. And the matchups where you would want to destroy the spell or trap, so like maybe Labyrinth or a Runick deck or something like that, in those matchups, you're probably not resolving Diabell's effect, because they're not using monster effects. Like, if you're playing Lab and they just set 5 pass, or Runick and they set 5 pass, you're not even resolving Diabell, so you're not summoning the Zapper Shrimp. So in the matchups in which you would want to use it, you're likely not able to. I did think it was good against, like, Sangan summoning sometimes against Tenpai, but that's limited, so it's going to come up even less. Whereas in most of the other matchups, it just, yeah, like, you're not hitting anything in Snake Eyes with it, hitting any other spell traps doesn't do anything. Against Yubel, maybe hitting a Nightmare Pain is useful, but you don't need it to hit it. Like, yeah. These might get cut. But that is it for the Synchros. Then for the Runick Fusions, we've got 3 copies of Hugin, 1 copy of Jerry. Again, Hugin and Jerry are one of the main reasons why this deck works so well together, because they are your non-tuners that you're using for your Synchro summons. So Hugin being a level 2 non-tuner pretty much takes the place of a Stellar and Elzette. Oh, I mean, we still got Elzette, but it definitely takes the place of a Stellar. And then Jerry being a level 4 Dark non-tuner is what's going to help you get into your Light Dark Chaos Angel, as well as helping you to... People forget it has a graveyard effect, but it's very, very useful for clearing boards sometimes. Because again, this is a going second deck, and so you can go to the battle phase, summon Jerry, then crash into something. Like, you can go into your battle phase, use your Runick spells, and they'll skip your next battle phase, not the one that you're currently in. So you might go to your battle phase, and I'm like, Destruction, pop a card, Flashing Fire, destroy another card, Slumber, summon out Jerry, Jerry crash into something, pop something else, evenly. Like, they're just these crazy combinations of Runick spells that you can have to clear multiple cards off the opponent's board. Now, one thing to note here is that I was not playing Munin, and this is what I might add instead of the Chen Yang, because there was actually one of the few matches I lost was because Munin was not in my deck. Whereas I should have just had it in there, could have summoned it and just won in time, but instead, we ended up with a draw. So yeah, I think I would definitely add in a Munin, and I could see the second Jerry coming up sometimes as well. Now for the Xyz monsters, we're playing one copy of Baguska, one Evil Swarm Exciton Knight, and then one copy of Typhon. These cards are all so good in this deck. I feel like, aside from Chaos Angel, the Xyz monsters have won me more games than the Synchros. They're all so good, especially like the Baguska and the Exciton. So a lot of decks just can't answer Baguska outside of like SP Little Knight. So if you have this and like a Freezing Curses, like you know what their out is. You just hold your negation for it and then they lose. Exciton Knight is something that nobody sees coming. People have forgotten that it exists completely. I'll show you guys a cool combo with it too that I like a lot. And then Typhon. People think that Typhon is a card that only gets played when you're about to lose, but that's for going first decks. For going second decks, it's extremely useful for just clearing things off your opponent's board. It's big, and then also people forget that you cannot activate monster effects with 3,000 or more attack, and so it means that you're not going to get hit with Nib. If you summon too many times, you just make that your 5th summon, and you can play with your attacks to, you know, make your highest attack monster one that you don't mind losing. But then also, your opponent can activate Flame Birch if it's on the field, or Varudris. So it's very useful. And then the final card in the extra deck is SP Little Knight, which does come up a lot too because again, normally in a White Forest deck and other variants of the White Forest deck, you would put up, you know, your level 2 non-tuner and your level 4 tuner, but they would both be just regular effect monsters, but not something from the extra deck or anything. But here, because the level 2 non-tuner is often a fusion monster, it makes SP Little Knight a constant threat. You're always going to have access to SP Little Knight, and that's very powerful for clearing boards. Now, the combo I was going to show you guys earlier, right, that I mentioned earlier, is with Exciton. So one thing that I like a lot, one of my favorite combos in the deck, because again, no one sees it coming, but it's a 2-card combo of just Dark Ruler and Sylvie. All you do is you Dark Ruler your opponent's board, normal summon Sylvie for search for Tails, Tails will search for Rucia, special summon Rucia. Most decks don't stop this because they're like, oh, well, what do you do with a rank 4? What rank 4 does anything? Like, I have Promethean Princess, I have all this other stuff that can stop it. But they forget that Exciton exists, and so, like, princessing this is, like, awful, but you could. But if you do princess this, then you can just, like, Runick Spell, summon out Jerry, then overlay. Like, you still have access to it. If you don't princess this, and you let me overlay, it's a quick effect. So if you activate Princess now, I'm still blowing up your entire board, and everything's negated, so you likely cannot negate this either. And so there's so many games where the whole board is negated, I summon Exciton, wipe whatever's left, then they keep like some monster or something, and then I might summon a Hugin, and then make an SP, banish something else that's left. Then I might make a Typhon, bounce something else. Like, you can just clear so many cards, and it all starts with like just normal summon Sylvie. Normal summon Sylvie, get to Rucia, make Exciton, wipe everything, SP, Typhon, boom. There are so many games where that happens that I'm able to set up my Runick stuff and then kind of take over from there. Another thing that I want to play around a little bit with in this version of the deck is that Exciton is a light fiend as well. And so I kind of want to test out some Runick cards with this, or not Runick, but some Fiendsmith cards with this. Because you can just make Requiem here and then continue. And Requiem can go into Engraver, and then Engraver can equip the Requiem, and then you can use Engraver's effect to clear another card off the opponent's board. So the Fiendsmith cards inherently are solid going second as well. And then if you, let's say, get to like Sequence Desiree. Sequence Desiree can also go into SP Little Knight, and you can trigger SP and Desiree to clear 2 more cards off the opponent's board. So I think that's also a pretty cool play. So like, it's another way of just clearing your opponent's board, which I think would be pretty useful. And then the Fiendsmith engine's also highly efficient to give you some recursion on the upcoming turns as well. The levels are also quite convenient, being level 6 for your Engraver, which makes it pretty easy to go into your level 8 and 10 synchros. So there is some synergy there. I am going to test that as well, but as is, this is the current list. Now I will show you guys the side deck that I've been playing. It's probably going to change as the format evolves a little bit more, but as of now, what I've been playing is 3 copies of Dogwood, 3 copies of Ash Blossom, 3 copies of Different Dimension Ground, 3 copies of Barrier, 1 Terraforming, 1 Set Rotation, and then 1 copy of Secret Village of the Spellcasters. Again, this is all subject to change because the format is going to be changing rapidly over the next couple of weeks, but I have really liked the Dogwood, the Ash, and then the Secret Village package. I'm not too sure about how good these are going to be moving forward, but I definitely like these 9 cards. These are going to be subject to change. Maybe I'll add the Rivalry in here, maybe I'll add a Gozen, maybe I'll add a few other defensive cards. I am also looking at what cards are going to be good breaking boards that could also be good defensively. That's really what I'm looking for, because the main thing I'm going to be siding out is if I go first, I need more going first cards, but I don't want them to be strictly going first cards. I need them to also be useful in later stages of the game. Like if I draw it off of a fountain later versus an established board, I need it to be useful. And that's something that these cards kind of lacked. So we'll see going forward. I'll definitely keep you guys updated on the evolving side deck. I'm curious to see what you guys are going to be siding in this upcoming format and how you're going to evolve things. Like I was playing different dimension ground mostly for Snake Eyes because there wasn't a lot to really combat them, but it's also good against Yubel too, but mostly for Snake Eye. But now, how popular is Snake Eye going to be? Do I still need to side heavily for them? Maybe not, or maybe I can play more generic cards. It's just so tough to say right now because you don't know what's going to be good right now or what's going to be popular, so it's so hard to side deck effectively. You can really just kind of look at what people are talking about and assume that's what they're going to be playing. Like I saw that LZ spiked up in price, and so I guess I'm going to be expecting more White Forest decks, but would they be playing Runicks or some other build? But if you would like to see another build of White Forest, definitely check out the other version that I posted on the channel. The link will be right here on the screen. It is a Fiendsmith Kashtira White Forest deck that is absolutely insane. It did get a little bit touched on the ban list because Appaloosa is gone, but the deck still does a lot of incredible things. Definitely check that out, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.